where history's shadows cast long, unsettling doubts, the truth lies buried. From cryptic wartime codes to assassinations that scarred generations, unearth the secrets the world tried to forget. Hosts Tim Gardner and Eli Frame guide you through a labyrinth of unanswered questions, where every clue pulses with danger and intrigue, and perhaps an opinion or two. It's not all facts because history never is. Welcome to the Ciphered Past.
Welcome. Tonight is going to be a really good show. We're really excited. We'll introduce our guests in just a moment. But I want to say hi to my co-host and good friend, Eli Frame. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. And a little backstory about tonight's show. I was on a phone conversation with this gentleman, and he blew my mind by his story. And I'm just so excited to have him and his daughter on our show tonight. It's going to be fantastic. And we're going to be joined later by Paul. But without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce him. So John Gagne, is that correct? Am I right? Okay. Gagne, okay, perfect. Thank you. Who is neither a professional author nor a JFK researcher, but a retired manufacturing engineer whose life took an unexpected turn after uncovering startling truths about his parents' previously undisclosed CIA work. A 1970s era hippie who grew up in Austin and eventually built a career in manufacturing. Gagne only wrote Misguided Patriots because he felt compelled to share what he found, family records, testimony, and discoveries that unexpectedly intersect with the broader intelligence world surrounding the Kennedy assassination. Now retired in East Texas, he offers a rare personal window into Cold War operations that existed alongside and sometimes outside the history most researchers focus on. Now, Jenna, John's daughter, her curiosity about her family's history and her support for her dad along the way helped him research and learn more about his parents and ultimately inspired the story he wrote. Those shared discoveries became a meaningful bonding experience between the two, and that helped bring Misguided Patriots to life. And without further ado, I want to introduce Mr. John Gagne and his daughter Jenna. Thank you so much for being on Ciphered Past.
Thank you for having me. It's really exciting to be here.
Thank you. Well, let's start. Give us an introduction about yourself, and also Jenna, if you both want to talk about this story, because this story is absolutely fascinating.
Well, I guess it all started. The first chapter of the book is called The Call, and it really all started with a phone call. And my daughter Jenna had been kind of pressing me to start playing around with AI. I had never done anything with AI before, and I was just sitting talking to conversationally to Grok AI, and I mentioned something about the fact that I had grown up in a mental hospital that had rooms with 5 walls, and the AI identified almost immediately what mental hospital I was talking about, and began to tell me about this Perry Point Mental Hospital in Maryland. That what it was telling me wasn't really lining up with what my mother had told me growing up. She told me we lived in a town called Perry Point, and there was a mental hospital there my father was doing a residency in, and that we lived there with him while he was doing that residency for psychology. And then uh, what I come to find out is it wasn't a little mental hospital. The whole name of the place was Perry Point. All of Perry Point is this VA hospital, and it just didn't match what my mom had told me. I called Jenna and told her about that, uh, who apparently I never told before that I grew up in a mental hospital. I had never told her that story, and her reaction to that, and the fact that I didn't know these things growing up, and that my mother hadn't told me that, her reaction is really what prompted me to investigate this further. If she hadn't responded the way she had, I probably just would have let it go, and that would have been just that day and a strange discovery. But she really prompted me with her, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, and looking up that particular VA hospital online and finding out they were doing MK Ultra experiments there. And it just kind of exploded from that phone call.
I think I want to say, like, that moment whenever we had that phone call, I realized how odd his family background really was. I think I would run into friends and talk about how, I never really knew my grandparents. My grandmother was in the CIA, and then my grandfather passed away when my dad was 5. And it was just kind of normal. I was completely desensitized to some of these stories. And then finally, it was kind of like that moment when he called me, I realized just how crazy some of this all was, and the fact that we never asked any questions about it.
Now, okay, so how many years did you grow up at Perry Point?
Well, I was only there for yeah, it's an exaggeration to say I grew up there. I was only there for probably the first 7 or 8 months of my life, but my sister was there with me and my mom. So it was my mother, my father, my older sister, and myself. They had been there a year, and it's just kind of odd to have your whole family living with you at a VA hospital. And as I said, that oddness just kind of kicked off the whole investigation into what my family was doing.
So you always knew your mother worked at CIA?
She had told us that she worked at the CIA, and that when she got pregnant with my older sister, that she quit. And so, she told us she couldn't tell us what she did when she was with the CIA. She would always recite this oath that she took, that if she told what she did while she was there, she'd be hanged until she was dead, which, as we researched the CIA oath, that's not what it says. So I don't know if they actually take a different oath than they say they give to people, or or if I'm not sure what's up with that. But she didn't really tell us anything about that time, except that she was in the CIA before she met my dad and had my sister. What we soon figured out is that she stayed in the CIA, and a lot of what I say we figured out, is connecting the dots. Some of the dots further apart than other ones, but the total picture is just so overwhelmingly obvious. We come to these conclusions. We don't have evidence. We don't have your uh, Freedom of Information Act memos that talk about this. I mean, it's just our family, and we have to look at what we have for family records to try to figure out what really happened. Now, what we soon learned after this conversation this day was that by calling my older sister, who lived at that mental hospital with me and was older and remembered more, she told me that she had a letter that my mother had written to her son in 1987 that was 22 pages long, and it told the story of her life. And she also had 8 hours of tapes that my mother had recorded in 2007, which was like 2 years before her death, where she also told the story of her life. So I quickly got a hold of those, and then went through and analyzed both of those, compared them to each other, and that gave us kind of a chronological method of going through her life and trying to figure out what really happened.
Wow. And you weren't aware that she had those tapes or that story until you made that phone call, huh? She didn't just
That's
mention
right.
it to you?
That's
Okay.
right. It's pretty odd.
Yeah. Well, do you want to give us a few minutes about your parents' background story, and sort of introduce that, and then let us know what you found or where the story takes us from there?
Sure. So I was telling you, my mom graduated from this Catholic girls' school and went to work for a research group called the Cardiza Foundation. It's a blood research foundation inside Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia. It still exists today. And at the time, it was run by an Army general who, when they first started the foundation, I mean, he was active duty Army general that was running that foundation. So she didn't actually work for Jefferson; she worked for this Cardiza Foundation, and she had always told us that it was just a job at Jefferson Hospital when she got out of college, and then she later went to work for the CIA. Well, what my daughter quickly figured out was she found a Freedom of Information Act memo on that CIA website, uh, of all their released documents, that actually had a list of the universities that the CIA actively recruited women from. And there were 14 universities in the United States and all the country that they recruited from and got referrals from. And one of them was the college that my mother went to. So we real quickly figured out that based on that it was probably straight out of college, because that's how the CIA did things anyway. Uh, she went straight to Jefferson and got involved with a bunch of research stuff in 47, which was also, when the CIA was stood up. So she was one of the original CIA people, and she stayed at Jefferson for about 4 or 5 years. We've determined that she was, I don't want to give away too much from the book, but we determined she was involved in a lot of early experiments on people and doing stuff with radiation. And in fact, it even led to her exposure, led to her losing her teeth. She told me her whole life she knew she was going to die of leukemia because the way she handled nuclear or radioactive materials during that time frame. And then in 51, she leaves there and goes to work for the CIA in DC in OPC. And OPC being the covert side of the CIA, where at the time, Dulles and Cordmeyer and all those guys are working, and 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 that's when she's telling us on her tapes that she actually started the CIA. And what we find out as we go through all these tapes and this letter is that she's mixing things together. There's truths or half truths. There's breadcrumbs that she drops. She's not really telling us a whole lot of secrets or anything. It's but you can just put things together. It's kind of difficult to explain, but I sent you some samples of some of her video and audio. I don't know if you had a chance to look at any of it or listen to it, but she describes like a meeting taking place when she gets there on her first day, where General Doolittle is in there, Richard Nixon is in there, Allen Dulles is in there, and she the rest from that point forward, almost the whole rest of her life, everyone that she's involved with is and everyone that's around our house is somebody. If I told you all the people that I have ever met in my 67 years that you might know. I mean, I got one that you might know, Kathy with the Go-Go's. I knew her growing up, but I can't name another person that you would know who it is. Yeah, Paul knows her too. So, but there's not another person that I could name. My mother, on the other hand, she knew everybody, and it just wasn't normal. Um,
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because if you listen to the story of E. Howard Hunt and when he was talking to his son St. John, St. John got a bunch of mixed stories too, right? So when I was looking at your information, I went back and I looked at St. John and his testimony, and it's parallel to yours. It's interesting. Yeah. A lot of the CIA agents, the former transparent, I feel like they were lost in their own like delusion of things, if that makes sense. Not to say that your mother did it, but I'm saying from the stories that I've heard, um, to be transparent with your regular family, and then you have the CIA, which they call a lot of the agents call their real family, which I don't want to put a fine line between that, but I'm saying um, because they spend so much of their lives, in secrecy, and so it's really hard to separate reality from what the secrecy is, and so that, I mean, when I listen to what the sample size, what you sent me, it makes sense. It makes sense. Because you hear a lot of these stories. I mean, you hear from Atlee Phillips's kid too. He never got the truth that he was in Dallas until the day he died. So, I mean, it makes sense.
Well, my mother's long gone when I'm listening to these tapes, so it's kind of crazy. Uh, some of the things match up perfectly to what I remember in my life. Some of them are completely contrary. She says things in there that I mean, I'm kind of blessed or cursed with this audiographic memory where if I hear something and I put it into my memory banks, I remember really well what people say, and she told me things when I was growing up that both this letter and these tapes completely contradict, and sometimes those two stories are completely contradictory, and it just becomes real obvious that she's making up some of this stuff as she goes. Some of it seems rehearsed, like the letter says exactly the same thing that she says on an audio tape, you know, 30 years later, which, how does that happen? I mean, nobody tells a story with the exact same words 30 years apart. It's like it's rehearsed and then other things are mashed together.
One one thing about these tapes that, like, as an out, especially, I didn't grow up with a close relationship with my grandmother. I just didn't know her very well. She died when I was very young. So listening to these tapes, I kind of had an outside perspective to be able to listen to how she was speaking. And she, the times that we found things from those tapes were always because she would almost catch herself in things that wouldn't make sense or someone might question. So she would tell a story and then she would pause and try and make up something to kind of disarm it. So, for example, she was telling a story about how she had to do special receipts and expenses to be able to qualify to get, I think it was, what was it, disability dad for dad's death. Yes. So So she was saying that every single veteran would have to, keep all of their expenses and have them reviewed, which is nonsensical, especially for the time, how many veterans there must have been. And she caught herself and she was like, nowadays, I'm sure that would never be able to happen. And it was like these those were the breadcrumbs and the Easter eggs when she would trip up for a second and you could just feel it kind of falter a little bit, and that's when we would be chasing something down because it just didn't seem right.
And then Jenna, of course, doggedly goes back to these CIA files and actually finds a document that talks about that if you're, I forget what the word they use, like if you're a refugee agent or whatever.
It's just, yeah. So if you're in a safe house, the specific amount that she threw out there that she needed to get funding for the kids was actually the amount that CIA agents in those safe houses got.
Wow. Like a specific dollar
The
amount.
specific dollar amount. Yeah, we have that document.
Well, not only that, but the idea of keeping receipts and everything she described that was crazy that you knew didn't. But that particular example that Jenna's talking about, I mean, she describes on this audio tape that she has to sit down, and I remember her doing this. When I hear it on the tape, it's like, oh, I remember that, but that's not what she told me she was doing. But she would sit at the dining room table every year with this big stack of all these documents, and she would tell me that she was doing our medical insurance for the year. And I grew up thinking that that's how people did that. And then when she tells this story on the tape about how for Social Security benefits and veterans benefits, she has to have all the receipts from the whole year of everything for the kids in order to support getting this stipend that she gets. You know, and this was after my father was killed, and to get this stipend that she gets, it's just absurd. You didn't have to do that for Veterans Administration money or Social Security. Everybody knows you don't have to do that. But Jenna finds a document where it describes that exact process where they have to keep all these receipts, and it tells how the CIA agent has to justify all this funding for their kids and stuff when they're like left in a location where for some reason they can't get out of there.
Oh wow. Well, Eli, you want to get this one because I'm just trying to let some stuff.
No, yeah, I'm just trying to keep it straight here. So, okay, so she's in DC. She's moved to DC. Is your dad there now?
My dad is on his separate trek. He also goes to private Catholic high school, a military academy in New York, and then he goes to a Union College in New York, which is a pretty elite school. It's not Ivy League, but it's a pretty elite university there. And he goes there, and then he gets out and he joins the Air Force, gets drafted, and joins before he's actually drafted, I think, or he gets his letter and he goes down and he joins up in the Air Force. And then when he joins the Air Force, he goes to the regular basic training in Lackland and San Antonio. Then he goes out to Colorado for detailed training, which isn't particularly unusual. But then he goes to Cape Canaveral and spends some amount of time that we never really determined exactly how much it was. But it was a pretty long time because he joined in October and he didn't make it to Baltimore until late March or April. So that's kind of an unusually long time, I think, for training. But he finally makes it to Baltimore and is assigned to ARDC, which Air Force Research and Development Command had just been started. It had just been set up to develop this aerial surveillance over the Soviet Union. They didn't know what they're going to do, balloons or satellites or airplanes. I mean, this is long before the U-2. This is trying to figure out what they're going to do. And so he goes to work at ARDC and ends up working there at this location, which is on his discharge papers, which I gave you a copy of that. It's on his discharge papers. If you look it up on Google Maps, it's a police impound lot in downtown Baltimore. And just as my mother had told me other weird stories, she had told me that during the Korean War, my father was in the Air Force. And he died when I was like 5 years old. She had told me he was in the Air Force during the Korean War, stayed stateside, worked in a military base, and played in the band and wrote the newspaper for the base. But he wasn't even at a base. If you look at his discharge papers, he was at this little facility that the address is on his discharge papers. It says it's Air Force Research and Development Command headquarters, and it's in the middle of Baltimore, which kind of makes sense when it's first stood up and they're trying to figure out what to do and they're working with the CIA and stuff. But when you go back then to to that 22-page letter that she wrote, she explains in there that while she's at DC, going to all these embassy parties and hanging out with all these NSA and CIA people, when she's working at OPC, that's when she meets my father. And so it becomes pretty clear to us that he's working ARDC that's connected to CIA and developing this U2, and she's working on the covert side of CIA. So to us, they obviously met, with her as some kind of liaison or somehow involved in that U2 development, and that's when they met.
All right. So, wow. It's just, I can imagine for both of you guys just figuring this out, like going, wow. I mean, um, their site's called Misguided Patriots. The ebook is going to be out on January 31st. Again, it's called Misguided Patriots. It's a fictional story inspired by real life events. Our guest tonight is John Gagne, as well as his daughter Jenna. And of course, we got Paul with us as well. Now, my little rant there I had just before that, what I talked about, what I wanted to get into is that when you both start to understand about this past history about family being in CIA, and I mean, like, what was both of your thought process? I bet your mind was blown. Like, wow, I'd be just, that'd blow my mind.
My older sister and myself have talked about this a lot and started talking about exactly what you're asking about early on in this whole process. And she's not with us today, but she helped a lot with this whole research project as well as my daughter. And when we talked to each other about it, it was really odd. We both didn't feel really anything emotional or anything about it. Jenna did. Now Jenna was shocked. Oh my God, this is crazy. And my sister and I had long conversations about, was there something wrong with us? Shouldn't we be upset? Shouldn't isn't this troubling? Wouldn't most people be troubled? Why are we not troubled? But I don't know if that's a result of how we were brought up, or I just can't explain it. But it was kind of fun for us, and to learn this stuff, and it never really bothered me. It drove Jenna crazy, but it never really bothered me.
I Yeah, I would say it probably came off that way. It was very exciting. I think what drove me crazy was the fact that I mean, some of this stuff was blatantly obvious. And the fact that they essentially spent, more than half their life believing all of these lies, like blatant lies, was just alarming. I mean, I mean, some of this stuff was right there. I mean, not realizing their dad's background or all the things that he worked on, or not even talking about all the people that their mother knew, was very shocking. And then,
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine growing up and your mother knows LBJ's wife and Governor Connolly's wife, Richard Nixon, Allen Dulles? She knows all these people, but she never mentions it to you your whole life. I'm growing up through Watergate. I'm growing up through the assassination. I grew up through the whole family jewels controversy, and she never mentions this. I mean, I would be telling my kids, "Hey, I know that guy." It's kind of crazy.
Right. Yeah, that's mind blowing.
I mean, did you ever ask your mom, like, hey, I just got back home from school, and they talked to us about President Kennedy, and he got assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. Did she ever have a look in her face like, I don't know about that?
Well, no, but what she did do was that, like, the day after the Warren Commission report came out, she had it in her hand and she didn't put it down till she had read it cover to cover. I remember that. And that is a dry, long book. I mean, that is that's not normal. But we didn't, and that's the kind of thing that, yeah, I don't remember really discussing with her. I just remember watching what she did, and uh, it's. I know we have a lot of time here with an hour or two, but there's no way I could tell you about all the stuff that goes on in these 8 hours of tapes and the things that she describes. But she describes that time in detail in the tapes. She talks more about there was an incident that happened right after the assassination that she talks about in detail, and I link it to my father's death. I'm not sure if I'm right about that, but I do. But she tells a story about how the family, or not just our family, but everyone's family, was gathered that weekend around the TV watching the funeral procession for JFK. It was like it was on TV and everyone was watching. And she tells a story where the phone rings and she answers the phone, and it's the head of the psychology department at the University of Texas, and he's asking for my father. And my father gets on the phone with him, and he invites him to a party that night with a bunch of officials from the administration in Washington, is the way she puts it. And she tells a story about how my father gets all pissed off that at how inappropriate it is to have a party that night, and especially with people from the administration in Washington. And no, hell no, he wasn't going to go. And then it's only 7 or 8 weeks after that he has this one car accident and is killed.
And to give some context, his dad was a professor there of psychology, so he worked in that department, and was very well accomplished in that department. However, when we try to dig up about his departure and why he was leaving the university around the time of his death, it had been scrubbed. I mean, you could find some evidence that he worked there only because of the studies that he was involved in and his peers. But aside from that, it's really hard to find any other records besides him being on the payroll and the work that he worked on there, which was very interesting.
Yeah, we were able to find some newspaper articles, and I think I may have sent you one of those articles that talks about him giving a speech with LBJ. It's in the time leading up to like a year. I think that speech was actually in 1962, but considering that my father had worked at ARDC, considering the fact that he had been at Cape Canaveral working, doing something for quite some time, training or learning what it looked like so he could go back and know what the requirements would be for cameras to be able to recognize it on the ground in the Soviet Union, or what. I don't know what the reason for him being at Cape Canaveral was, but considering that attachment and his ARDC time, and now he's a psychology professor at the University of Texas, and he's given a speech with LBJ. He's on the. It seems unusual that you couldn't find out whoever this guy is that's accomplished enough that he's up there speaking with the vice president at the time. How come you can't find out anything about this guy? It's in that article, so he really was there, and he spoke, but you can't find anything about his history. Which I never, my mother, I never knew that growing up. I'm 67 years old, and my father died when I was a little kid. You'd think my mother would share stories like that with me to, like, pump me up about how my dad was, or say, yeah, your dad, he gave a speech with the vice president once. Never, not a word. nothing.
But the funny thing about that is that that article, along with some really weird notes, were actually sitting in my attic because she made a family, like, one of those baby books you can give your grandkids, and I just held on to it. I mean, it was in my bedroom growing up, and I mean, being a kid, I just flipped through it like, oh, this is my grandparents' stuff. Never thought anything of it, and then we dig all this up, and I'm like, between that newspaper article, and she wrote me a long letter about the thing that she hopes for me is, essentially me to be a great patriot, which is kind of just an odd thing to put in your grandchild's baby book. It's like she left all of these breadcrumbs, and they're sitting in our laps.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It was Johnson will be introduced by Dr. Harry H. Ransom, Chancellor of the University, and then it goes down further. University faculty members on the conference schedule are Dr. Robert F. Peck, Dr. Ralph L. Duke, and Dr. George G. Gagne. Yeah, wow, it's crazy. Uh,
She in this time between when she went to DC and she met my dad, this is a time that just disappeared. There are big gaps in this. She records exact years and times and dates that she's doing different things. Who her boyfriend was in high school, and then she gets to a point and there's a huge gap of years, and she just never says anything about it. So from 51 to 54, there's nothing. Now, that's the time that my dad is at ARDC, and we know that she met him somewhere in there, but she's doesn't talk about a boyfriend. She doesn't talk about her friends. She doesn't talk about a trip she went on. She doesn't talk about work. It's just left out. And there are gaps like that we're in writing the book. We're having to do research on what was going on in the world. Where might she have been? Searching like cruise line, going on ancestry.com or whatever, and they have cruise line manifests and different things like that, and doing different searches and trying to find information about where she was, what she was doing. It was fun. It was fun.
I'm thinking about like this is I mean our audience is going to be absolutely fascinated by this episode simply because we are getting a front row seat by a child of the CIA essentially, right, and the granddaughter as well. It's just these are fascinating information. And when I look at this from I mean I always keep going back to like how surprised were you and all this other stuff. But I mean, again, to understand that she was just an integral part, like a being part of the originals, all the way down, to when she left. I mean,
Well, I'm not a JFK. This stuff interests me, but I'm not like you guys tangled up and investigating it. I've watched different movies and stuff. I know who Alan Dulles is. And I know about the stories about different people's thinking that the motive for Kennedy's assassination may have been because of Dulles. You listen to, I sent you an audio that I don't know if you had a chance to listen to, but at the end of this little clip where she's describing this meeting when she first meets Alan Dulles at her first day in Washington, and she says, Alan Dulles is such a sweet man. He would come and visit me every Christmas, and I just hear that, and I was like, it doesn't fit what my picture of Alan Dulles was in my head, that you would say that.
Well, and what's so crazy about it too is I was actually telling somebody about this, is that it's like there's weird behavioral things in our family that I don't think we have even really acknowledged. Like, I had talked to my dad about how I remember he took me to the JFK assassination site. Like, we happened to be in the area and he wanted to make sure to take me there. We toured, and I I don't know how that was presented to me. My dad was never really a huge JFK assassination. He wasn't into that. Never talked. I was probably 8. And fast forward, I'm talking with my husband, and he makes this remark about how, the conspiracies around the JFK assassination. And this was maybe a month or two before we dug all this all up, where I was like, oh, like people are so crazy. Like, obviously what they said happened really happened. Like, I was the farthest away that you could get from believing there was any conspiracy around the JFK assassination. And it was kind of like influenced, I think, by that experience, along with just like there was no interest in it whatsoever from my dad or myself, which makes this even crazier.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it makes sense too, because again, Eli and I have been studying this case for years and years and years. And whenever we come across any CIA, either operatives or we find that their stories are so bizarre and they are so secretive, and it mirrors what, John, your mother's stories about. I mean, they're just, I mean, like, look at James Angleton, and like Eli, this. I mean, like, he's just bizarre. Like, you'd be hard pressed to even figure out what his story is. I mean, same thing with Atlee Phillips and all those other guys. So
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, like Tim said, I know that we've read a number of stories from Angleton and Phillips and Dulles. And, I mean, it seemed to have wreaked a lot of havoc on their families and their children. It sounds like you hopefully avoided some of that, but I know there was a lot of animosity there with their kids after they passed or once they retired, and it was like they were never there, and all they did was lie, and we can't believe anything they said. So
Well, there's certain individuals that I don't, that my mother doesn't specifically talk about, but just from reading the stuff that she wrote and the tapes that she made, I know she knew, you know, and we spent a lot of time. Like, she would write that this particular summer, all we did was go out and party. The girls from the CIA that she lived with. She lived with 3 other girls from the CIA. They would go out all the time and go out with all these NSA guys and all these FBI agents and Air Force generals and stuff, and go to embassy parties in DC. And I grew up my whole life and never heard a story about anything like that. It just seems like something you might mention to your kid, you know? Like, one time, surely there was a time when I was watching TV, and there was a picture of an embassy or something, and she was sitting next to me and say, "Well, I've been in that embassy before," but I mean, nothing.
yeah, he was the head of CIA counterintelligence from like 1954 to 74, I think. So from the beginning, he was early OSS, and then ran counterintelligence, under Dulles, Helms, McCone, and then ultimately got fired right before the Family Jewels article that you mentioned in your notes came out. I mean, I think they used that as a pretext for when it came out that he had been spying along with the FBI on thousands of Americans.
yeah, and he was the ultimate CIA guy. I mean, like, he lived and breathed the CIA. He was the one that carried Alan Dulles' ashes with him in the box. He had, when he had gotten fired in 74, he was drunk, and they had interviewed him, and he looked like he had lost his life, essentially. Like, he was just a ghost at that particular point. But his story is interesting because he would be in the aftermath of different things. So, like, the murder of Mary Pinchot Meyer, he was there directly to take the documents that she had, that she was writing documentation talking about her relationship with John F. Kennedy and things of that nature. and they had a very exclusive group in the Georgetown area with Wystar Janney and obviously Alan Dulles. And he is. I mean, he did a lot of work with Israel. He did a lot of work with Eli. Was it? He was in Italy as well at some point, like overseas, and
he was in Italy during the war, and then he was involved in the influencing what it was at the 1948 election to prevent the Communist Party from gaining a hold there in Italy early on. So he had ties with, and he was he was watching Oswald. He had a couple hundred pages file on him.
Yeah, well, I think, and when I talk to my sister, this, it's gotten to the point now where I keep going as I keep discovering things, which I can't stop now. I'm still, the book is finished, the book's finished, but I'm still doing this every day. And I'll call my sister and say, I just figured out that mom was lying about this, and she's kind of worn out on it, and just like she lied, everything was a lie. There wasn't anything that wasn't a lie. But you bring up Angleton. I'm pretty convinced that when I go back and I read about what all, I started looking into a lot about ARDC and the U2 and all that when I started writing this book, and trying to figure out my father's role and my mother's role with this whole U2 development, and it. I'm pretty sure that when they discovered, like my father, when he left ARDC, when my father left ARDC, if you read on his discharge papers, there's a wealth of information on these discharge papers. When he left, it says he left like it's a 4-year service that you do there, and he left like 4 months early, and it says on his papers, at the convenience of the government, we're letting him out early. And then he goes straight from there to the University of Maryland, where if you spend any time looking into MK Ultra at all, one of the only universities that they supposedly didn't shred all the papers from was the University of Maryland. So they talk about MK Ultra being conducted at these 80 different schools, but we shredded everything except for the stuff about the University of Maryland. And that's where my father immediately goes from ARDC. He leaves the Air Force, marries my mother, and goes into the University of Maryland and starts studying psychology and doing research at the VA hospital across the bay, which to me just scream, especially after her earlier medical time at Jefferson and her exposure to radiation, losing all her teeth and everything. It just seems real clear to me that they left this U2 thing behind once Lockheed started building them, and they moved over into this MK Ultra stuff. And when you go back and look at what later happened with the U2, and when the Soviets actually got the classified documents, and when word got back to Angleton, who was doing the counterintelligence then, or I guess he was his whole career, but when that information came back and went to Angleton, and they assigned him to go out and find out who leaked this stuff from ARDC on the specs for the U2, my dad is probably the only guy in the whole United States that is tangled up in psychology and MK Ultra and doing all these experiments with these drugs and interrogating people and stuff, and worked at ARDC headquarters where they drew up all the specifications and everything. And I just cannot imagine, if I'm James Angleton, I'm talking to my dad. I'm saying, you got to help me figure out who did this and who leaked this stuff. And so I'm sure they're tangled up with him. I just feel it. So when my dad finally finishes and gets his PhD from the University of Maryland, so he gets his master's there and he gets his PhD while he's working at this mental hospital that he has his whole family living at, which is, as my daughter pointed out to me, is really crazy and something you probably wouldn't do with your children. So I don't know if we were subjects or what or why we were there, but we were there. And so he moves from there in '58, right after that discovery of the U2 stuff leaking. Shortly after that, like a few months, uh, in August of July or August of '58, he moves to Austin, takes a job at the University of Texas, and brings our family there. And when we go there, uh, kind of simultaneous to our arrival, a bunch of people that move into our area where we live in Austin get together and decide they're going to build a Catholic church, a new Catholic church there. One of the first places we went was to look at this Catholic school, because that's where I went to school, in the church. And when we go onto their Facebook site, and even today, if you go on there right now today, on their alumni page of that school, and that church is still there, Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Austin, you'll see me and my sister on the front page of the alumni group today, right now. And it's like, we, my sister and I both, we looked at that. Well, I didn't notice myself. I said, Shelley, that's you right there in the front row. I recognize it. It's your first communion picture. And she says, well, yeah, that's you in the back row back there in the middle. So we're in two separate photos that they have overlaid on each other, two separate photos, and I'm in one and she's in the other one, and it's 60 years later. I mean, and so Jenna immediately upon seeing that says, well, something funny's going on at this church, and we start diving into this church.
Yeah, so I think the craziest part about this school, that page, is they had a reunion and they actually took down notes from the inception, like, I mean, 2 years before the inception of this school, how it was built, who founded it, all the way through this reunion historically. So everything from this being a completely fireproof building to the people involved in the building being also involved in Europe and the army and having connections with things that clearly seemed like they could be connected to the CIA, to people mysteriously dying from the church and them noting that down. It's all in this big booklet they created for the reunion, which is just odd. I've never seen anybody else do it for a Catholic school. And it is shared online. I think it's like 25 to 30 years of history that they just took note of for this school.
And it's still on there. You can look at it today. And of course we haven't talked to them about this book, but they're front and center in the book. And everyone that hangs around with my mom and my dad, I guess, before he died, that's connected to this church, everybody, including the pastor, and everyone is military, or they're all Air Force. They're like the Monsignor the guy that started the church, the first guy, his name's McLean, and he actually gets a church built. He builds it, and then as soon as it's built and it's ready for service, he sends a letter to the parishioners that's in this packet Jenna talks about, saying, we're I got to say goodbye to you guys. I'm sorry, I've been recalled to active duty in the Air Force. I got to go. I'm leaving. And I'm not going to be a priest anymore. I'm going back in the Air Force. And then they bring in this new priest. And so this yes, yeah. So they bring in this new priest who went to that pontifical university, the American University in Rome. He was educated there, and his name is Monsignor Deason. They bring him in to run the place, and you look at his background, and he is Air Force. He's air traffic control in the Air Force, and worked North Africa during the war, and then went to the Pentagon and served 5 years at the Pentagon, and then all of a sudden he's the pastor of our church. And then everyone else in the church is all, when you look them up and you look up their obituaries and stuff, they're Army intelligence, they're OSS guys, they're all Air Force pilots. Everyone's military. I mean, there's not a plumber. There's not, you'd think you'd find somebody that owns a liquor store down the street, something. But yeah, everybody's either IBM, university professors, or their Air Force. And just a lot of strange things happen that are all around that church. And also at that church, other people that attend that church are like this guy named Dan Love, and he's uh, LBJ owned all the media in Austin, Texas. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but he owned the radio station, he owned the TV station. All media in Austin was controlled by LBJ, and his handpicked guy from the radio station, who, when they started the TV station, came over and became the news director and evening news anchor, went to our church, used to hang out at my house all the time, and he was in charge of the news and controlled the news for the whole city of Austin. And there were, yeah, he did. And so all these, there's just all these people that are in this church that are connected and hanging around my house, and even my neighbor. When he left when he left the radio station uh, to take over the TV station, my next door neighbor took over the radio station. So, and they're both over at my house all the time. So I've got all the people that are controlling the news in Austin hang out with my mom. It's like, why is that? She's supposed to just be at that point a housewife or something.
And one thing I was just thinking about is, I mean, this is a Catholic church, right, in Texas in the 1950s and 60s. Now, I could be wrong, but there weren't many Catholics in Texas in the 50s and 60s, were there? I mean, is it odd that there were this many, in one group who were so influential? I mean, I don't know. I thought it was a mostly Protestant area, and maybe.
It was, it was, but our area, I don't know how to explain it. Jenna spent, I don't know how much time looking at that area. I think at one point she decided that the builder who built all the houses was actually the CIA. But there's there's a lot of crazy connections. These guys, the guy, we don't have time to go through all the connections uh, to people that were very important or became very important, uh, that were tied to this church. And
And well, and the other thing is, what, and I think, it wasn't not a small piece of your all's lives. Like, I cannot stress, like, these people, the pastor was over at your house all the time. I mean, they were a key part of your childhood growing up.
And Bishop Riker himself, Bishop Bishop Riker is another rabbit hole that we ended up spending weeks going down, where as soon as you look up Bishop Riker and start looking into him, he's the millionaire bishop that supposedly took $3,000 that he earned working at U.S. Steel over a summer. Or he took $3,000, and during the Great Depression, he invested it in the stock market and made $5 million, or I can't remember, three or five. It doesn't matter. Back then, it was a lot of money. It was like $3 or $5 million, and from $3,000 during the Great Depression. And then he supported his entire diocese and all the churches during the Depression with this money that he brought. And he was from a small town up north. There was no source for this money. It made no sense that he had all this money. And we tracked back and tracked through his education and where he supposedly went. And it turned out that where he supposedly went to college and the university that he went to doesn't exist. There was no university named that in that town. And in that town, what there was Seagram's distillery. And Seagram's, everyone in that town worked at Seagram's, everybody. it was a whiskey town, and it was Prohibition was coming up, and all of a sudden this kid, he goes up there and stays for a little while, then he leaves and he goes to work on the docks at US Steel, which is right across the Great Lakes. Picture this during Prohibition, right across the Great Lakes from Canada, where they can obviously could have brought that whiskey across if they wanted to, and if he was working the docks, he'd be a great guy to help with that. Then he leaves there and goes to LaPorte, Texas, and works at the, if you know where LaPorte is, it's a port. He goes to LaPorte, Texas, on the Gulf Coast, and the same thing. And if you look up the history of all the moonshining and all these guys, they talk about Oswald associating with the organized crime people and on the Gulf Coast and everything. Those guys were controlling all of that whiskey smuggling during that time. And that's when he moves down there and has all this money and supports this whole diocese. And nobody questioned this multi-million-dollar bishop that got this money out of his butt, And he's the bishop that is in charge of our diocese in Austin when they build this church. And in fact, the pastor that was the air traffic control guy in Africa and worked at the Pentagon that came in, he actually, the whole time he was our pastor at Sacred Heart, he was also the bishop's personal secretary. He was both. So, I mean, and I don't know if you guys familiar with Operation Underworld that happened during World War II with the OSS? They yeah, they enlisted them to help, protect against these U-boats, sinking our ships, and because these smugglers, would they knew how to, sneak stuff around and not be seen, and so the OSS enlisted the help of these mafia smuggler guys to get our stuff safely over to Europe. Well, it seems real clear to me that this bishop in LaPorte, Texas, was like one of those guys, and so I don't know if they got pressured into this involvement with the CIA and all these military intelligence people being tangled up at that church, or if it was they knew something about that bishop maybe and were able to force this upon him, or if the Catholic Church was really running the CIA or what. I mean, I don't know. That's kind of y'all's bailiwick, but it was weird.
I think one thing too, like, I know y'all are kind of talking about how you would react to some of this and some of the behaviors of children of those in the CIA. And I think one thing that I don't know if my dad ever acknowledged it, but I think that ever since I was a kid, I always sensed a sort of, I don't know if it was a dislike, but almost like there was something there was a disconnect between my dad and my grandmother for sure. And it feels like this has finally cleared that up for sure. It definitely, I don't, maybe it's not weird to me because, I grew up with my dad and any of those behaviors that he picked up on from his parents, but it is different. I mean, we were talking about, like, I'm married now, and it's hard for me to give a hug. Like, it drove my husband crazy for years that I could not. I hate hugging. Come to find out, my grandmother never hugged my dad. Like, that's weird for people. It's just kind of this disconnected version of family and reality that they had.
Stepping back, it kind of reminds me of Michael and Ruth Payne a little bit. Like, they're just, she seems like a very, innocent home, maker. Michael is a everyday worker. You don't know much about him at all.
Yeah, many of my mom's stories on those tapes, she's actually talking about what this Monsignor Deason is sitting in our backyard with her, talking on the phone to my father's parents after he died. These guys were, I mean, they were close. They were at our house.
I mean, but my whole point to that was the mannerisms of all these people, whether it be the Paynes, the people at the church. There's like some sort of, I don't know how to really put my finger on it, but it's fascinating, like how secretive and how, I don't want to say weird. I don't know what to really say. I'm just absorbing all this, but
I mean, it's just Tim. It's like it's one of the wildest stories I've ever heard.
So when they moved to Austin, and my father goes to work at the University of Texas and gets tangled up in this psychology and space stuff. I don't know what all he's doing there. My mother is tangled up with the church and spent a lot of the time at the church, and my some of the people my father worked with ended up being very important people. There was a guy named Bob Taylor. I don't know if y'all know who he is. You're a computer guy, aren't you?
yeah. I work in AI development agents for actually, ironically, IBM. But I don't work for the CIA. I promise you guys.
Well, we could talk about that a lot. But like Bob Taylor, he's the guy that they give credit to for developing the mouse, for developing the ARPANET. For he worked with JCR Licklider. You know who that is? Uh, he worked with Licklider on this whole concept of computer mind interface, where they wrote these big papers and stuff way back in the '60s about how within 50 years that there was going to be one mind of all the people on earth connected through a computer and all this stuff. And Taylor actually ended up developing a lot of the early internet stuff with the ARPANET. And he was a graduate student while my father was teaching psychology at the University of Texas. And when my father died, my mother, well, I heard multiple stories of what my father was doing when he left Austin that day, and why he quit the university. But he, like I said, this was in January after the assassination, and my father gets in the car and leaves by himself heading northward out of Austin. And what my mother told me was that he was going to Evanston, Illinois, to join his friend Sandy Aston, who, I don't know if y'all know who John Aston is from like the Adams family. Who that is? Uh, so anyway, he was married to Patty Duke Aston. These famous Hollywood people.
It's Sean Astin is the lead. He's actually one of the characters in Lord of the Rings. So that's his dad, which is John Astin, Patty Duke, mom. Yeah.
Rudy's
Yeah.
dad?
Sean
Oh,
Astin.
okay. I know Rudy.
Or for you younger
Yeah.
people out there that watch Stranger Things, that was Bob, the guy who got killed in season 2.
So supposedly, this is me. This is before any of those guys got famous, right? Like I said, everyone my mom knows is somebody. It's very strange. And my father. So supposedly my father is going to work with Sandy Aston on instrument panel development for aircraft in Evanston, and that's why he left. And then he had this accident. He only made it to Waco, had an accident, was killed. And that's what I know about my dad. He was a newspaper reporter and a musician in the band at the airbase that didn't exist. And then he was leaving Austin, quit his job at the university, and left to go work on this instrumentation for these aircraft. Well, Bob Taylor, who was one of his underlings at the University of Texas, ends up going to NASA and becoming a big project engineer at NASA while he's getting before he gets into all this ARPANET stuff that leads to the internet. And the story goes that the way he got hired at NASA is by suggesting this instrumentation set up for their simulator at NASA. So he's doing the exact same work at UT that my dad was doing. Now, like I said, there's the only way I know of what my dad exactly was working on was just from my mother telling that story, which I suspect part of it's made up and part of it's true. I don't know, but it's really interesting that it's the same exact story that supposedly got Taylor the job at NASA. And
Yeah, and I think that kind of circles back to what I was talking about earlier about how, like, some agents. I don't want to, John. I don't want to say that your mother is in this club, but like a lot of the agents who were in this, they wrapped their whole lives in this, and then their family life was like secondary to what the agency was. And you find, like, the residuals of that with like James Angleton. His daughters disowned him essentially. I mean, they hated him. Alan Dulles' wife, I'm sure you guys know this story. He was at his bedside alone. His doctor would come in at times, but his wife would not go in there. She refused to go in there. And his children, I mean, you heard that story about him sending his kid to the beginning parts of the MK Ultra thing, which is ridiculous. But I mean, it's just instances like this. I mean, David Atlee Phillips' son hated him. And he hated his dad. And it's just interesting because
I don't know I don't know what's normal. If I tell you how our family went, maybe you think that's even crazier than what you just described. I don't know. I mean, I grew up in a drug culture, uh, doing tons of LSD, smoking tons of pot, heavy into drugs, and uh, at best, a hoodlum. And then I eventually straightened up, went to college, and got my stuff together. My older sister, my mom's a devout Catholic. My mom and my dad, devout Catholics, and we're tied to this Catholic church our whole life. My sister, as soon as she turns 18, she joins the Church of Latter-day Saints and moves to Salt Lake City, Utah, with her husband, which where she didn't just leave town. I mean, she left every bit of culture our family had. That whole Catholic Irish identity that my mom had. I mean, I don't think you can obliterate that more than saying, "Oh, I quit. I'm going to be a Mormon." I mean, I think that pretty well uh, did that. My little sister, who well, I'm not going to say. My little sister's just been troubled her whole life, and she's definitely not happy or healthy. Let's just put it that way.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I think like having, I mean, I don't want to get into backgrounds, but like I had dysfunctional parents growing up, and I was an alcoholic for a long time. I've been clean for a while, but I mean, yeah, congratulations, Paul. That's awesome, man. And so there was a disconnect with emotions with me as well. And like, you carry that on from like your past to like your adulthood. And it's really hard. I mean, I can definitely identify, Jenna, what you're talking about, not giving hugs. Like I had a trust issue with like people for a long time, really insecure, couldn't trust people, always thought that, because I always thought that if my parents could do that to me, who the hell in the world, who could I trust in the world, right? But then, like John, like you just mentioned, I grew up and I kind of straightened things out, and thankfully, because I mean, like that, not everybody gets that chance, and my heart goes out to your little sister. That's yeah, it's crazy. So, but anyhow, sorry, I didn't mean to make that about me, but I just wanted to, yeah, I can identify a little bit there, but yeah. So anyhow, please continue. You were doing a great job. I'm just absorbing this.
Yeah, when we put together this book, you said a little while ago, this is going to sound crazy. Some of our viewers are going to watch this and say, "This is a crazy story. This is unbelievable." Well, when I wrote the book, I started out that I was going to write kind of a factual story, where I actually told my parents' stories, straight up, and had the evidence in the book to support it, and a project like that. And I quickly figured out that I had these big holes in time, and then I was trying to figure out what probably happened during that time, but I couldn't really tell for sure, and it was kind of a dry story, and I decided to just go ahead and fictionalize it, make it into a novel where it was inspired by these real events, but it was a more interesting story that people could just enjoy reading. But we also, my daughter's idea really, we also put together a website that's like a companion to the book. I know a lot of authors have a website for their book, but this is kind of a companion website, which it's not finished, and I don't know if it ever will be finished. But we're actually taking a lot of these documents and photographs and different things that make it all seem a little bit more believable when you actually look at this stuff, and organizing it by chapter and putting it on this website that people can look at, so that when they read the book and they go, that's really unbelievable, they can see excerpts from my mom's letter, or they can listen to her actually talking on one of her audio tapes and telling this crazy story, which some of them are so crazy I don't even want to share them, because you'd probably just stop the podcast and say, "This is we can't talk about this." And I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah, it's insane. But yeah, I mean, you've done a great job with the website. I was looking at it uh, earlier, and it's really well done, and it is really interesting. I look forward to reading your book because you have it divvied up by chapter on the website, such that I'm assuming the things that are taking place in the book, or the environments in which they're taking place, you can kind of see. You have some photographs there, some photographs as well as documents to kind of, yeah,
Well, I don't want to give away too much from the book, but suffice it to say that the main character in the book is Jenna, my daughter, and in the book is Jenna Gagne. Uh, she she conducts this investigation, and it kind of follows along the same lines, but she in the book she ends up teaming up with uh, a figure that's linked to this whole story, and he becomes kind of her partner in investigating. And as they uncover these things, a lot of the things they're uncovering in the story and they're talking about in the book, I'm actually showing you on the website. So when they talk about finding my father's discharge papers and reading on there, like for instance, there's a little spot on the discharge papers uh, where it talks about their skills, the skill levels of the person. And for my father, it lists general mechanical 9. 9 is the highest you can get. Mechanical 9, electrical 9. It goes through multiple different skills of these nines, of these complex abilities. And my mom is saying, but he was a reporter and he played in the band, and it's like you just look at the paper and see where it says on here, headquarters ARDC. I mean, he was not a reporter and played in the band. It's just, you can see it along with the book telling you that. You can actually look at it yourself and say, yeah, well, I see where they got that.
Very cool. So with our show, we usually do final words. We do final takes with our our JFK guests, but since this is a more of a broader topic, but also related to the JFK case, we give our guests an opportunity to do a final word. We do final take, but final word. So I'll start with this, and then Eli, and then we'll have the rest of you go. So I just want to thank both of you, the three of you guys, for joining us tonight. This episode has been absolutely absorbing. I'm just thrilled to have you guys on to talk about this book and just about this story. I'm just kind of at a loss of words of how awesome this is. So I just want to thank you both.
yeah. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us. And, I think I'll probably spend a lot of time thinking about the journey you must have gone through with learning this information, digging, finding out more things, and then questioning sort of, the whole past that you'd experienced with your mother and your grandmother. It, it blows my mind.
I'm up. I'm not sure what to say. I've talked most of the time. I think everybody's heard plenty from me. Maybe you got something to say, Jenna?
I just it's a really special book. It was special to have the opportunity to help my dad find out so much on his own father's background, somebody that he didn't get the pleasure of growing up with. Um, it was just I don't think that that's a life experience everyone can have with their dad. It was just really, really cool to help him. And it's also been special to see him pull that into a story that any reader can read at any age. I mean, it's a really cool, it's fictional, so it's digestible for your Gen Z reader, and it's also really entertaining for somebody that falls in another age cohort because they're going to be able to look at all this evidence and understand it. Um, and then he also just blended in our real life experiences and our personalities into it. It's really cool.
Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank Jenna. I want to thank just the panel tonight. It's been great. Eli, you have any last words before we take off, bud?
No, thank you for sharing your story with us. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Yes. And if you guys could do a part 2 with us, we would be honored. We want to hear more as we get closer to March. We want to revisit this, but we also want to get, also Paul a little bit more involved and kind of just get, this story really needs to get out, and we're excited for you guys and the book release. So anyways,
I'm excited to see if you guys can dig anything up about Fort Clark, what's going on during that time with your channels. I'm interested to see what y'all come up with.
Yeah, we'll both look into it. And John, you and I talked, so we'll keep up the dialogue for sure, and I'll let you know what Eli and I come up
we'll
with.
See we'll see if we hear anything, and I'll certainly look into it.
Again, thank you guys so much. This has been great. We really appreciate your time.
All right, thank you.
Thank y'all.
All right. Like I tell everybody watches the show, we'll see you next episode. The truth is out there.